From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on the Plus. If you're with us, I appreciate that. You may have just turned over from one of the network programs while you were watching this morning as the President Trump, and he'll remain president until noon today, made his way from the White House to Marine One, which is on the front lawn there at the White House, and then from there, and we'll have video of this throughout the program, then flew from there to Andrews Air Force Base, where he gave some remarks, and then he got onto Air Force One, and as far as we know, as we speak right now, he and Melania are on their way to Mar-a-Lago in Florida, where they will be, and that will be the end of his presidency. We've got some of his final words, where we go, and today we're going to talk a bit about, the inaugural moving forward, some of what the president has said, what we've seen in the days leading up, and what happens next. And as always, we'll have the phone number up there if you want to join in the conversation. But I think this is kind of a good time to talk if you're joining us on the Plus from the point of, okay, there was activity and the president now has made his way to Florida. The inaugural doesn't happen until noon today, so we have this window in between to kind of set the stage and talk about things, and you're invited to join in the conversation with me and Professor Thomas Schwartz over at Vanderbilt. It's good to have him on with us this morning. Professor, thanks for joining us. Did you watch some of what happened this morning?
I did. I watched the coverage of the president's departure from both the White House and then from Andrews Air Force Base, and giving himself that sort of a little bit of a rally feeling with some of his supporters, and then leaving and giving a sort of synopsis of what he sees as his historical legacy.
Yeah, I was struck by kind of and we'll talk about the details of what he talked about, but yesterday, of course, instead of doing a live address, as many presidents sometimes do when they leave, he had a recorded address that he released over social media, and basically what I thought it was him more or less just kind of trying to recount all the accomplishments of his administration, and that was about it. It seemed like it was more of the same today.
Yeah, it is a tradition, though, in more recent times for presidents to have something of a farewell address. One of the most famous is, of course, Dwight Eisenhower's, who warned about the idea of a military-industrial complex back in 1961. And presidents often do take the opportunity of a farewell address to set out their own vision of where the country should go. Trump did an interesting thing in claiming, in a sense, that Biden, even though he never mentioned Biden's name, that Biden will be successful because of the foundation that Trump had laid, which is kind of an interesting way of looking at it. He didn't, in that sense, warn that the new administration was going to be a disaster. In fact, he said it's probably going to be a success because of what we did, which I think was an interesting take on it.
Yeah, it was. And, they handed out, apparently, copies of what kind of speech he was going to give at Andrews Air Force Base before he boarded Air Force One. And the media talked about it, and they looked at it, and they said, well, what can we expect? And the media was reporting, well, he does mention Biden by name. Turns out, based on what he ended up saying, and we don't have a copy of the script, but the reporters there on the scene said he completely went off script, 100%, right. And which was fine. I think he kind of stuck to the points from yesterday in a lot of measure, but he didn't mention Joe Biden's name. What's the significance of that? It almost strikes me that he's staying away from even saying the name because he just can't bring himself to say the name of the person who beat him.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's remarkably petty on his part that he can't. But that is Trump. And, the closest he got was to say the new administration. And I suppose in some measures we ought to be grateful for that, because at least it's an acknowledgement that there is a new administration and that it has a legitimacy that he has denied it before. So, yes, he could not bring himself to mention Joe Biden's name, and that is unfortunate, I think.
He did mention the vice president, correct?
Yes, and that was, I think, sort of interesting. It was at the tail end of his comments, but he did mention Mike Pence and Karen Pence, acknowledging, of course, the fact that they were not at that ceremony at Andrews Air Force Base, but that Mike Pence will, in effect, be representing the administration at the inaugural in what would have been the more traditional way in which presidents do, namely in the transfer of power with Joe Biden.
Now, it seems pretty clear to me, and Pence wasn't the only high-ranking Republican that was not there. In fact, to be quite honest with you, especially knowing how much Donald Trump likes some of the huge crowds, and he's had some huge ones during rallies over the past 4 years, this was a very small crowd, and it wasn't because of limits because of COVID, because we know they don't usually place limits on that anyway. It's a very small crowd. And you know, based on the way things played out, I mean, Pence had plenty of time. If he wanted to be there this morning, he could have been and easily gotten back in time for the inaugural, which is not until noon. Same thing with a lot of the Senate leaders and others who just chose not to be there. And, Mitch McConnell, I think that's no surprise, especially after what he said yesterday. What do you think about that?
I think McConnell and other Republicans are trying to walk an interesting line. They're trying, on the one hand, now to separate the Republican Party from Donald Trump without necessarily losing the support of people who supported Donald Trump. And this is going to be a very tricky thing for them to do. But I think elected Republicans on the whole think the Trump person is toxic to their chances, and that they want to move the party beyond Donald Trump. Now, the hard thing is, how do you move a party beyond without talking about the person who energized it and who has this fanatical group of supporters? So that's the trick that they're going to try to run. And I think that's one of the reasons the crowd was small, is that none of the elected representatives, or very few of the elected representatives, chose to go out and say goodbye to Trump.
Yeah, knowing the president, he had to be very disappointed by what he saw with that crowd out there this morning. I know that he wanted something much larger than that. I do wonder, with regard to Mitch McConnell saying what he did yesterday, which was essentially that, yes, the president definitely egged on those rioters and had a big part, is the way I interpreted it, in what happened, at the state cap or at the U.S. Capitol. All right, so we know, that the new Senate is going to move forward, in the not too distant future on the articles of impeachment in that trial. And of course, it is now a democratically controlled Senate, but it's pretty much 50-50 anyway. I guess one of the theories out there, based on what you just said, Professor, is that Mitch McConnell, wants this party to move on, and the last thing he wants to have to worry about is President Trump ever running or getting involved again. And if they can impeach him again, then maybe he'll just disappear into the woods. And so McConnell, you're thinking, is maybe setting the stage for him to start, egging on other Republicans to vote with it, and that they're going to convict him in that Senate hearing on impeachment.
I think that is the case, in the sense that McConnell seems to be planning a willingness to try to get 67 votes. Remember, he has to get a good 17 Republicans to go along, and McConnell is probably the only person who could do it. On the other hand, I am struck by the fact he hasn't actually said it yet, and I'm wondering whether there's not a possibility that he is waiting to see whether Trump's departure cools things down to the point where people can somehow just get past this, or decide not to do it, and not to go to a full Senate trial. Now, that's a speculation on my part, and I could be completely wrong, but I think that he might be waiting. He might be waiting to look at what Biden wants to do, whether Biden himself wants to push this forward. Remember that if an impeachment trial comes, the Senate has to shut down, basically, and deal with that. And there could be delays then to some of Biden's legislation and appointments, and maybe they don't want that to happen yet. The other thing that's not completely clear is whether you can have an impeachment trial when a president has already left office. If the penalty for impeachment is removal from office, how can you have a trial if he's already gone? That some constitutional scholars claim that. There might be a debate over the constitutionality of going ahead with impeachment itself.
Let's take a phone call or two before we take our first break, and we'll go to Joe. Joe, good morning. Hi, Joe. Hi, Joe. Are you there, Joe? I know he's there. He knows how this works. I'll put him on hold for a moment. We'll come back to him because Joe's a regular and he's usually there. But guess who's up next? Cindy, and she's a regular too. Cindy, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Hi, Cindy. Go ahead, kiddo. What's on your mind?
Man, I'm really going to miss Trump. Thank God for him. He got me ahead. He taught me a lot of things, and I was very happy. Because of where I was homeless for 5 years before and yada yada. Had to work 2 jobs to bail my way out of it. And I had to sleep at a truck stop in my van, which was great. At least I could buy a shower for $9, and it was awesome. But the thing of it is, I'm going to miss him very much. I wonder what in the world's going to happen when it comes to taxes, taking in too many people, because we have homeless now who, no fault of their own, they just couldn't afford the bills because of this COVID. But things happen, and maybe there'll be a better life ahead, maybe not. But I'm going to miss it. And I'm going to miss him. I loved him. I loved his family. And he spoke in a way that I loved so much because he spoke to us. He gave it to you straight. And even though people say, I don't like what he said, blah, 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 at least it wasn't sugar-coated or in a language that I really had no earthly idea what you were talking to me about. I'm like, what the heck is that? So I got to get a dictionary. And the wording,
he was definitely a straight shooter. He said what was on his mind. I'm wondering, and I know Cindy, I remember during the campaign, I mean, she was behind Donald Trump back when he ran, and she says she's going to miss him. Now, one of the things he talked about in his goodbye over at Andrews Air Force Base was taxes. And he goes, I hope they don't raise taxes on you. You heard talk about this. And he said, if they do, well, I warned you. I'm just wondering, I mean, two things that come into play, and you talk about some of the president's achievements. Certainly, he did a lot for business and, with taxes lowering. And then the other issue is, are things going to change with regard to maybe more people coming to this country, trying to come across the borders? And it won't be, will he continue with the efforts of the wall, which I don't think he will. I don't think he's going to take down what's been put up. I'm talking about Joe Biden. What do you think?
I think one of the priorities of the Biden administration, which we've heard, is that he is going to introduce a comprehensive immigration bill to set a path to citizenship for undocumented people in the United States, as well as setting up new criteria for immigration. There have been, of course, these scenes of caravans possibly approaching the border, talking about coming into the United States. So the immigration issue is going to be one that's there, and the Biden people seem to feel that it should take a priority position. And so I do think this will be one of the things that will be discussed in the early parts of the administration, and we'll have to see which way that develops.
Listen, let's take a quick break on that note. When we come back, we've got more calls, maybe Joe back in there and others. If you want to join us, 737-7587. Now is the good time. You're not missing much on the networks because it's between. The president has already left the White House. He's on his way to Mar-a-Lago on Air Force One right now. He remains president till noon. And then at noon, of course, a lot with the inaugural, which will start. And we'll be covering that, of course, on the News Channel 5 network. But if you want to call and comment, like Cindy, how you feel about the outgoing president, how you feel about the ingoing president and the inaugural and how things have played out, love to hear from you. We'll take a break and be back with more with the professor right after this.